Okay, we are going to start knitting with a cast on using continental knitting, and then I'm going to briefly give you a demonstration of English knitting and the minor difference there is for casting on. Okay, here is our yarn that goes to our skein. Okay, the yarn that goes to the skein is called our working yarn. The yarn that we're going to have left over as we start our piece and has a loose end is going to be called the tail. Now, there are over 10 different kinds of cast-ons. Some are called a long tail, where you need to take a whole bunch of yarn from your skein and then make your first stitch way down here. And the reason for that, if you do a long tail cast on, is that you use this yarn rather than the working yarn that's coming from your skein to make your stitches for your cast on. For the demonstration purposes of today, we're going to simply start making our slip knot somewhere down here towards the end of our yarn. We're going to leave about at least 6 inches on the end. Okay, we're going to make a slip knot here, and then we're going to use simply the yarn from our skein going in this direction as we make our stitches to put on our needle for our cast on first row of stitches for our knitting piece, which in this case will be baby booties and garter stitch. Okay, so you should have your yarn in front of you. You should have about 6 inches pulled from the end that you're going to be working with. You're going to be working at the 6-inch mark of your yarn. Okay, I've got my 6 inches marked off. All right, now at about that 6-inch mark is where you want to hold your yarn over your index finger. Your hand should be like this. Your index finger should be separate from your other fingers. You should wrap your yarn around that index finger because we're now making a slip knot to start our cast on stitches. First row of stitches for your work that you're producing. Okay, yarn goes over the index finger and it crosses over. Okay, once again, holding the yarn, keep holding it. Bring your index finger up, pull the yarn around, cross it over. Take your thumb, put your thumb over that where it crosses over, because you're making a loop right now to start with. That's all we're doing. We're going to pull this off of the index finger, pull the loop off. You're still holding the loop. You still have your crossover right here. Now, the yarn that goes to the skein is the yarn that we're going to pull in back of the loop. So it should look like a pretzel. The yarn at this point should look like a pretzel. Okay, now the yarn that's in back of the first loop that you made, you want to pull it through that loop, like this, like so, and pull it somewhat tight. You want to keep it somewhat loose too. You have a big loop here. Okay, this is your slip knot and your first stitch. I'm going to go through that one more time very quickly, a little quicker that is, and then we'll put the yarn or this loop on our needle as our first stitch. Pull it apart. Let's practice that one more time just to help you remember how to do it. Okay, you've got your yarn at about the 6-inch mark where you're holding it right here between your index finger and your thumb. Here's our little tail, our 6-inch tail or so. All right, we loop the yarn over the index finger, and then we cross it over the first loop. Okay, it should look like this. I like to hold it here so it doesn't slip out of place. Pull it off the index finger so I have my loop. Looks like this. Here's the yarn that goes to your skein. It goes in back of the first loop to make a pretzel. I like pretzels. Anyway, so the yarn that went in back of the first loop needs to come through the first loop. So as we hold the first loop, we pull this loop through and then we let go because we just want that to go tight not really tight, but because we still want to be able to decrease the size of this loop to fit on our needle. All right, now this time we're going to go ahead and decrease the size of the loop by simply pulling a little bit on this end. Okay, and then we'll decrease it some more in a minute. It's still kind of big for the needle, right? Now I want you to pick up your needle. I want you to place it inside of the loop, like so. Okay, it's still kind of big for that needle, isn't it? Okay, we want to narrow the size down by pulling on the right-hand side, the yarn, the side that goes to the skein. Okay, we still don't want it too tight. We want it to be able to slide on here so that we can get our other needle in there and make our stitches as well. All right. At this point, you've got 1 stitch for your cast on. 25 more to go for the newborn baby booty and garter stitch. All right, so now we always start with our work on the left-hand side, whether you're using continental method or English method. It doesn't matter which. Okay, always start with your work on the left-hand side. Pick up your other needle. Okay, got my other needle. And notice before you start where your fingers are. This is just like doing an athletic activity, right? So you've got, and I have my elbows supported on a table too. That's helpful. All right. I have my fingers underneath each needle. I have my thumbs on top. As you work, you may be doing different things with your fingers than I do, but I do things to try to support and create some tension as I go. That's why your fingers are in these positions. Okay. Before you start, though, and hold this yarn on there so it doesn't slip off. I want you to take this hand and make sure the yarn is going over your index finger. Okay. And you'll notice these 2 fingers can serve kind of like a sewing machine does to regulate the tension of that yarn that's attached to the skein. Make sure you're not using this yarn that's loose. You want to be holding the yarn that's attached to the skein, draping it over this finger between these 2 to help with your tension. Now, most people also prefer to go underneath the 2nd finger and over the 3rd finger to help with the tension. Now, some people, you get really stressed out and it gets so tight you can't even move it. Just go with the 1 finger, I mean, when I first started to learn, I even just held the yarn like this. That's okay. But as time goes on, you're going to find it's much more efficient to hold your yarn like this and get used to this technique. Okay. Continental style of knitting for cast on. Okay. Or English, either way, it's going to work this way. Your right-hand needle is always going to be in somewhat of this type of position. You don't want it way over here. You don't want your needles way apart because they both need to be working with the yarn here. All right, just an efficient way of holding knitting needles. Now, for the knitting stitch, which is all we're going to be learning today, is you put your needle, right-hand needle, up from the bottom up through the loop that the slip stitch that you made the first stitch, so that the stitch goes around both needles. Okay. Now, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is looping the yarn over the right-hand needle. So at this point, needle should look like this. And you'll notice I'm kind of moving these fingers around over here to get a little bit of tension. And I'm also going to hold the tail or the other yarn here for this first stitch only. That's just to get a little bit of tension to allow me to do the next step more efficiently. Okay. All right, so the key here, the next step, is to take this yarn you just looped over the right-hand needle and pull it through, down through the stitch. So in order to be able to do that, you have to first pull your needles down a little bit so you can see. You're going to be taking this yarn, it's going to be going to the other side of the left-hand needle. That's the key. So that you can bring the tip of that right-hand needle, it's going to scrape the left-hand needle and pull that yarn down through the stitch. Okay, so here, the next step is to pull this yarn up, not just put it on there like this, but rather go in through the bottom with the left-hand needle to make your next stitch. That's to give it more substance for your first row of stitches in your piece. Okay, now I want to place that right-hand needle right below the left-hand needle, so I'm ready to go for the next stitch. But before I do that, I notice this yarn is really loose, and that's just not going to work, so I have to tighten it up a little bit, just so it's snug, not too tight. Now I am ready for my next knit stitch. Okay, right here, we're going to loop it around the right-hand needle. Once again, okay, we're going to take this yarn through the stitch. Okay, you see how I pull it a little down through that stitch, and I'm letting the yarn loose with this finger so I can pull it through. I'm pulling it up, pulling the right-hand needle pointed away from you so that you can get your left-hand needle underneath the loop that you just made. At this point, you could pull the right-hand needle out, and I'm going to keep showing you the same way for this one, and then I'll show you what happens if I pull that right-hand needle out at this point. All right, so I put the right-hand needle below the left-hand needle once again. I pull the stitch tight with this finger. Tighter, I should say, not real tight. Now I'm ready for my next stitch. I already have the needle in place, the right-hand needle in place. I want to loop the yarn over the right-hand needle so that I can pull it through the stitch. Once again, it's on the wrong side of this needle, so I want to pull it through the stitch, and I want to scrape the tip of that right-hand needle and so I can pull the yarn through the last stitch. Okay, we want to twist the stitch so we can put it on the needle, so we twist it out. We're going to point the needle, right-hand needle that way so that we can put the left-hand needle through the bottom. Put the right-hand needle where it needs to be, underneath the left. Pull it a little tight. So there are several steps in this. Now, let's say, oh my gosh, the phone rang. The needle came out. That's all good, okay? Tighten it a little, not much. You don't leave it loose. Just put that needle right back in here through that top stitch, okay? And we are ready to go again for the next stitch. Pull the yarn over the right-hand needle. Okay, we pull it to the other side of the left-hand needle and down through that top stitch. And we're kind of keeping the yarn loose here so we can do all this. It's okay, because we'll pull it tight later. Pull some out so we have some slack. Turn it so we can twist the stitch. Enter through the bottom of the stitch. Oh, the phone rang again. Oh my God. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Just like put it back on there and pull it tight. And we're good to go again. Just so you see. When I first started doing this particular way of cast on, I would pull the needle out. Just because I was very practiced in starting my stitches this way rather than putting it back in place before I started. So needle in one more time, needle in, yarn over, working yarn over. Okay, I'm keeping a little tension here. You can even hold it with your finger here. You can pull it through, scrape the other needle. Oh, I caught a little thread there, so I'll let go of that. And I'm going to pull a big loop, turn it so I could twist the stitch and enter from the bottom. Put my needle down here, tighten it up a little, and I'm ready to go with the next stitch. Now I have 6 cast on stitches. I need 20 more. And I'll come back to you after I get that done so you can see where to go after you cast on your stitches.